Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating essay by Jin Lee, the founder of Peconic Inc. It's called The Mentor Who Is Still Climbing, and it's actually the final part of a larger series titled The Scaffold and the Mountain. What we're about to explore uses this incredible metaphor that, frankly, is a total game changer. It fundamentally shifts how we evaluate teachers, mentors, and really the entire educational environment we put our kids or even ourselves into. It strips away all those surface-level metrics we usually rely on and asks us to look at something so much deeper.
So let's just dive right into this with a question that Jin Lee proposes right at the start of his essay. Take a second and think back to the person who taught you the absolutely most important thing you know. And I don't mean a specific subject, like, high school math or history. I mean someone who taught you a way of seeing the world, or a way of working, or just a way of living. Now ask yourself, when they were teaching you, were they reading from a prepared script? Were they just delivering this rigid, set-in-stone curriculum? Or were they actively sharing something they were still finding their own way through, right there alongside you?
For most of us, when we really think about it, our most formative teachers weren't just reciting facts. They were people whose thinking was literally still alive. They were still right in the middle of questions they hadn't finished with themselves. Lee points out that the transmission of knowledge from these kinds of teachers didn't happen because their content was perfectly polished. No, it happened because simply being near that kind of person made thinking feel like a natural, urgent activity. It wasn't just some performance requirement to get a good grade.
And that brings us to Section 1, Base Camp versus the Mountain.
To really understand how to spot, or even become, a truly transformative teacher, we need to unpack the central metaphor of Lee's essay. There's a very stark contrast here. On one side, we have the base camp mentor. Now, this is someone who comfortably teaches from a very safe distance. They've got excellent maps of terrain they've never personally navigated. They can teach students exactly how to use the equipment perfectly in a totally controlled environment, but their uncertainty is entirely managed. Now, flip to the other side and look at the climbing mentor. This person is actively out on the trail. They aren't just teaching about the scaffold, they're actually building the building. The student gets to observe someone navigating the real, messy reality of the mountain in real time.
And here's why this distinction is absolutely crucial. Base camp preparation is honestly incredibly efficient. Students learn the vocabulary, they perform the methods correctly, and they look fantastic on paper. But eventually, every single student hits the point where the maps stop and the actual climb begins. And that's the critical flaw of the base camp mentor. Nothing in their highly structured preparation actually gives students the felt sense of how to keep going when the ground gets shaky and there's no clearly marked trail. So let's move on to Section 2, what still climbing actually means. It's actually really easy to misinterpret this metaphor and think that a climbing mentor is just someone who's inexperienced or maybe a bit underqualified, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The crucial point here is that still climbing does not mean lacking experience. Like Lee points out, the most experienced mountaineers in the world are still on the climb. They're just further up, navigating way more demanding terrain. Still climbing simply means the mentor hasn't stopped. They haven't just decided, okay, my current understanding is good enough. Instead, they possess this deep aliveness. It's a genuine, ongoing practice where they are still occasionally surprised, still uncertain about a few things, and actively learning from what they encounter every single day.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that aliveness shows up in a learning environment. A climbing mentor brings their own genuine questions right into the room, not as some sort of confessional, but to show their students that questions are the natural medium of an examined life. In traditional schooling, questions are often treated as just things you quickly ask on the way to getting the final correct answer. But a climbing mentor, they show that having questions isn't a sign of failure or incompetence. It's literally the absolute foundation of a serious intellectual life.
Which brings us right into Section 3, spotting a true mentor.
So if you're a parent trying to evaluate an educational environment or a mentoring group for your child, the very first thing you have to do is look past the obvious. When we evaluate a school, our natural instinct is to look at the curriculum, right? Or the shiny credentials, the state-of-the-art facility, the tech setup, or those really slick promotional materials. But Lee notes that while these things do matter, they are, at the end of the day, just surface features. A mentor who is completely settled at base camp can look incredibly impressive on paper. They can be warm, super knowledgeable, highly proficient, and yet still only produce students who only ever settle at base camp themselves.
Okay, so if you bypass the glossy brochure, what should you actually ask? Well, Lee gives us the golden question. Ask the prospective teacher or mentor, what are you currently working on? What question is alive for you right now?
It's so simple, but so telling. Because a mentor who is still climbing will have a real answer. It might be a specific project, a book, or maybe a much broader question about their field. But when they answer, they won't just be putting on a performance of expertise, they'll be sharing something they are genuinely, truly in the middle of figuring out. Another huge indicator is how they handle the unexpected. Say a student comes back from a project with a discovery that completely derails the day's lesson plan. How does the mentor react? Well, a settled mentor will gently, kind of smoothly, redirect the student right back to the expected path and those required outcomes. But a climbing mentor? They are genuinely curious about that unexpected finding. And not because they're just playing the role of the good student-centered teacher, but because their own curiosity is still fully fired up. What the student found is genuinely interesting to them. But hey, what if you want to be the one on the mountain? Let's look at Section 4, Becoming a Climbing Mentor.
Whether you're a formal educator, a manager, or a parent, how do you actually make sure you're out there on the mountain? Lee outlines a really clear blueprint for personal practice here. First, you absolutely must maintain an ongoing quest, something you are genuinely investigating just for yourself. Second, you maintain a deeply reflective practice. Third, you have to remain open to being changed by what you encounter. I mean, a mentor who stops being changed has basically stopped climbing. And fourth, you've got to shift your mindset completely, away from imparting knowledge and towards accompanying the student.
I actually want to pause on that second step for a second, because Lee uses a very specific, culturally rich term for it, muhasabah. This is an Islamic tradition of honest self-accounting. It's a deep reflective examination of your conscience. And the crucial part to understand here is that this reflection is not performed for an audience. It's not some professional development log that you're going to hand into your supervisor at the end of the month. No, it is private, rigorous honesty with yourself about your own intellectual and personal growth.
And practicing that kind of deep self-honesty leads directly to this realization. Genuine mentoring is not an act of impartation. It isn't just taking the data currently stored in your brain and transferring it to someone who doesn't have it yet. It is accompanying. It's walking right alongside a young person who is just beginning their approach to the mountain. You share what you've found a little further up the trail, and then, and this is the best part, you watch them find things that you totally missed.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, The Ultimate Question.
To really bring all of this home, we have to turn the focus directly onto ourselves. If you are in any position of guiding, teaching, or mentoring another human being, you have to ask yourself with total honesty, have you genuinely begun the climb, or are you still just comfortable hanging out at the camp? Now, Lee makes sure to note that the camp is not a failure. Almost everyone has to start there. The real danger is staying there. The danger is simply performing competence at base camp instead of realizing that there is this massive, beautiful mountain of genuine inquiry waiting for you.
The good news is, you don't have to be standing at the summit to be an incredible guide. Even if you've only just noticed the mountain and you're barely on the approach path, that is enough. Because as Lee writes, something genuine is where all of this starts. Offering a student or mentee a completely genuine version of yourself, someone who is seeking, asking, and growing right alongside them, is the absolute foundation of real education. It is the irreplaceable center of the whole shebang.
So I'm going to leave you with the author's final provocation. I want you to really consider this. What is the most important question alive in your life right now? And I don't mean the question you think you're supposed to be asking, but the one you are actually, truly grappling with late at night. Find that question, start your climb, and bring your students along with you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.